Guys, it's raining. Literally, I feel like the world is crying in my city because it's been raining for 3 days straight. Anyway though, hey guys, it's Lauren here and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So, if you watched my last video, you know that I am starting a book club for Black stories, and this is going to be the first video, the first book that we're discussing in this little book club-like series, and it is Beloved by Toni Morrison. Yeah, I'm really nervous to start this video, honestly, and I was really reluctant to start it just because, like, Beloved was one of the most tense and difficult reads I've ever done. Like, I had to take multiple breaks while reading it, but was it literally one of the most beautiful things I've ever read? Like, the prose and everything? Absolutely. So, even though it is a really, like, difficult read because it's a really heavy subject matter, I would still highly recommend it, obviously, because it's by Toni Morrison, a literal, like, national treasure, a legend. There's a lot I can explore with this book. There is a lot I can explore with this book, but instead of talking about all of it, I'm focusing on a theme. The theme that I'm focusing on for this video and for this book is going to be trauma, and it encompasses a lot in the book, but with trauma I'm going to be focusing on 4 main characters, the 4 leading ladies of this book, and that is baby Suggs, Seth, Beloved, and Denver. So yeah, that's what we're doing. Let's just get right into it. This book is obviously a historical text. It was published in, I think, 1984. Beloved, in case you didn't know, Beloved by Toni Morrison is a story about this woman named Seth, this, like, former slave named Seth, and basically this entire small town in Kentucky shunned her for killing her own baby in order to make that baby, like, escape the life of being a slave. This book kind of just explores, like, what happens, like, how she's recovering from that trauma of that, and also just, like, it's almost a supernatural story because the spirit of that baby comes back in the form of, like, the age the baby would have been had it lived the life that, like, you know, she wanted it to live. So it's basically like the main character, Seth, being haunted by this ghost of her past, this skeleton in her closet, and also trying to just, like, move on with her life, pursue romance with Paul D, move on after her mother-in-law died and after her, like, husband kind of just disappeared, and just, you know, survive, really, even after slavery. So that's what the entire book's about. And yeah, it was a sort of difficult read. It did have a similar kind of style, I would say, like, writing style to some Gothic literature I've read before, because if you've taken any English lit class, you've read a lot of Gothic literature, Victorian literature, stuff like that. It did have, like, a similar sort of rhythm, though Toni Morrison is in a league of her own. But one thing I did want to point out, the difference between Toni Morrison and a lot of these white authors and these, like, white books, you know, like the people that you usually praise in our English lit class, is that, like, when they talk about, like, Gothic or, like, horror in any sort of sense, the horror is usually coming from outside. It's this outside foreign force, and this has been a thing since Gothic literature. Like, it's always like the second they discovered a world beyond the West, they made a ton of books, like, discovering exactly, like, how beast-like these kind of, like, people could be, and, like, how, like, foreign forces can somehow jeopardize your life. But in Beloved, it's different, because even though this is sort of a horror book, I would say if I were to put it in a genre, it would be, like, obviously historical horror, I think. The horror is not an outside force. The horror is coming from within the home. It's literally the spirit of a baby that the mother killed. The horror is on their own land. It's coming from, like, the slave owner. It's coming from the trauma of being a slave. It's coming from having to do terrible things in order to survive. The horror is within the house, and that is what sets Toni Morrison's story apart from most stories that I've read that had to do with horror. This is a horror that is familiar, you know, like, this is a beast, this is a thing that is familiar to these characters, to our protagonist. So, I just wanted to get that out of the way because I felt like it was a really important point for the story. Now let's finally talk about the 4 leading ladies of this book. I'm gonna start with baby Suggs, because baby Suggs, she's the mother-in-law of Seth and the mother of Hallie, who is Seth's husband and the father of all of her children. He ended up going crazy. He couldn't follow her back to 124, which is the house that Seth lives in with her family. They haven't seen each other since Seth escaped from slavery. And basically, yeah, baby Suggs is an important character, even though she's literally dead for most of the story because she shows up so much in the flashbacks. It starts in this story with baby Suggs, because baby Suggs has experienced it all. Like, she's been raped, she's been with like terrible masters before, she's literally had to part with her children. She's had to do it all. I think baby Suggs is a good point to start, because one thing she literally says to Seth that stands out from the very beginning is that it's dangerous to love. The primary way that we witnessed trauma in baby Suggs is the way that she treated her children, right? This is basically because of the slave mentality that you have to have, because literally as a slave, you could not afford to form attachments like that. Like, literally your children can be like stripped from you and sold to someplace like across the country. Like, they could be killed in front of you, literally hung in the field where you worked. You couldn't afford to have attachments, and that's something that baby Suggs learned very quickly in her own experience. Like, half of her children before like her 4 sons that are mentioned the most, which is Sixo, the 4 Pauls, and Hallie. She had them, but then she also had a lot of children before that, and they all had different fathers. Baby Suggs literally tells Seth straight up that you can't afford to love people. Like, when Seth's sons, like, because she does have 2 sons, I believe it's Burglar and like another one I don't remember the name of. Seth does like mourn for them a little bit, but baby Suggs just like tells Seth that she cannot afford to mourn them because they were bound to leave anyway, because the ghost of the spirit, and because of another, baby Suggs just grew used to not being attached to children. Baby Suggs is really like the main portrait we see. She's the one that has been most affected, and really like we've seen the entirety of her life and how trauma kind of shaped it. Even like Hallie's the one that's about her freedom and everything like that, but like when she realized that Hallie wasn't with Seth when Seth like escaped and came back to 124 again, which is the house that they lived in, baby Suggs was the one that was most quickly adept in figuring out that her son was most likely not dead, if not just like gone from them forever. Yeah, baby Suggs is the figure who has gone through it all and has kind of like accepted her fate, and inevitably she ended up dying because of her depression. She couldn't afford to leave her bed anymore, and she just, you know, she died in her bed. She couldn't afford to live anymore because the trauma of it, and like just the detachment, everything that she's been through, the fact that her daughter-in-law had to kill one of her grandchildren and they just had to like move on from that, and ended up getting to her so much that she literally had to stay in bed and just couldn't even live. Like, she couldn't be attached to people, she couldn't talk to people the way she used to. It really does come back to this question that Paul D posed. Like, at some point in the book, Paul D is the romantic interest of Seth, by the way, and is the brother of Hallie, which is her like former husband that ended up dying. Paul D did ask like, how much can, you know, a Negro man take? That's basically the question that's posed in every single one of the characters' lives. Like, how much can we take? How much of this trauma can we take? And for baby Suggs, like, losing her grandchild at the hands of like her kin, that was the line. That was when she had to stop. I'm gonna bring this back, but once she started to love again, and then like someone else was taken from her, that was it. She couldn't do it anymore. But that's her story. Her story is tragic, but it sets the standard for what relationships look like in a time of slavery and in a time during like the Civil War. So baby Suggs is really just the rule book in a way. That's who she is for these people. The next character we have to analyze is, I would say, Seth, for one. Seth is basically going through what baby Suggs is going through right now. Seth has had 4 children. There are the 2 boys I mentioned before that ended up running away from home because they couldn't afford to live in a house with the spirit of their dead sister, and so they ran away. We didn't witness them the entirety of the book. And then she also had Beloved, who is the daughter that she ended up killing, so that way she wouldn't be captured by Seth's former slave master. And then we have Denver, who is the last one standing. We'll get to Denver though. Denver is a seriously interesting character, but Seth is basically at the moment in time that baby Suggs used to be at when she's trying to contemplate how she can move forward after living the life that she's lived. Because throughout the entirety of the book, like, we discover pieces of trauma that Seth just does not bring up at all in the beginning. And really, like, we discover these things the same time that like Paul D discovers these things, because Paul D essentially, you know how there's always a character in the book that's supposed to be the audience? That would be Paul D in that case. I don't even have complicated feelings about Paul D, but that's not what this video is about, so we're gonna move on. She slowly kind of exposes the trauma of the past in her discussions with Beloved, which is the spirit of her daughter made corporeal again and is just present throughout the entire story. So she ends up slowly revealing her past and slowly remembering her past that she's pushed so far back in her mind so she can move on and take care of her 3 children that were still standing. Yeah, Seth, it's difficult for her because she had to kill her own daughter, and since then she's kind of just repressed everything. Like, she could take the disappearance of her husband, she could take like his possible death and his possible abandonment, but what she could not take was killing her daughter. And so the thought of that did linger in her mind in the shadows, but it never came up. It just slowly like was brought back when Beloved began questioning like what happened. Beloved was really like the functioning thing of like what brought back Seth's trauma. Seth really shows how you can't just talk about trauma like that. Like, you need to, some part of you has to build a wall between like the awful things that happened and you surviving. You cannot afford to remember in order to survive. At the same time, that remembering is important because you can't afford to forget either. Otherwise, like, you know, the same things happen. It's a really complicated thing in the story that I'm gonna try not to avoid because we're just gonna talk about trauma in the story. But yeah, also just witnessing like people, like other like female figures, female slaves, like baby Suggs that have been raped by their masters and things like that. She's also kind of just learning how to love, how to form attachments, and it's hard to do that with this skeleton in your closet. Seth, throughout the entirety of the book, is kind of just in this crossroads of whether or not she should accept and, you know, acknowledge the past, or whether or not she should just move on without looking back. There are two characters that encompass like those 2 points. There's Denver. Hold on, I need water. My throat. Oh. Okay, I'm back again. There's Denver. Denver is supposed to represent the future crossroads in the sense, you know, the whether or not you should move on without looking back. And Beloved obviously represents the whole acknowledging and absorbing like that trauma, you know, like whether or not you should like keep that trauma. So those are the two characters kind of embody those different things, and they're both very complicated. So we're gonna start with Denver. Denver is the last daughter standing. And Denver, this girl was wild. She's kind of a selfish child in the beginning. She develops a little bit into a better character by the end. But in the beginning, she's selfish and she's lonely, which you can completely understand because her mother, like all her mother's trying to do is survive. But living in a house with a ghost and with a town of people that have shunned your family basically because of what your mother did to your own sibling, that does things to a child. And Denver is definitely the product of all of the trauma. The generational trauma just passed on and on and on. So Denver is deprived of companions because of everything that her mother did and everything that her family has been through. Basically, her only companion at this point is the ghost. Like, that's all that she has. She has no one else, and therefore all she has left is the past. And so she's trying to look towards the past despite being representative of the future and of moving on. Because while she wants her mother to ignore the past and just to stay in the present and like be with her, you know, like connect with her, Seth can't do that because like trauma is still lingering in the back of her mind. And because of Seth's crossroads kind of state throughout the entirety of the novel, Denver is kind of just left. Her only companion at that point is the ghost. It is the trauma. Like, that's all that she has. Because of that, Denver ends up making some questionable choices, including hiding the identity of Beloved's corporal form. Because at the beginning of the book, about like a third or so, not even like a third, like a fourth of the way through the book, Beloved, Denver's dead sister, comes back from the dead in the form of the age she would have been had her mother not killed her. She doesn't reveal her identity to Seth or anything, but Denver kind of knew instantly, like just like that, she knew. And she didn't say anything, despite the fact that Beloved's spirit kind of seemed not like a benevolent spirit. It seemed like a very sketchy spirit, but Denver just didn't say anything because she was so lonely. So Denver, unlike the two other female figures in the novel, Denver is very much a selfish child, but she's also a child that is thriving on attachments. Like, she is the future, and like the thing that she wants most and the thing that she needs most in order to move on is forming attachments. Love is her freedom. We will come back to that phrase because that's literally the entire purpose of the book. But yeah, love is her very own freedom because she isn't connected to trauma. She was never a slave, you know? She was able to live in a house despite the fact that it was haunted by a ghost. She was able to go and explore the town. She was able to obtain some sort of education. Everyone else in her family wasn't able to do that. So Denver kind of is this very different female figure in the story. Her role and her character in total is basically moving on. Now Beloved. Beloved, despite being the daughter, she is still kind of very much connected to the past. Oh my gosh, guys, my camera died. But anyway, yeah, talking about Beloved. Beloved, despite being like the daughter and not experiencing slavery or anything like that, her life was very much affected by slavery and the fact that her mom decided to take it in order to save her. Beloved's life was very much affected by slavery. Very, very much, because of the fact that it literally ended because of it inadvertently. Because her mom, from her own trauma, she didn't want her children to experience the same thing again. This is her ability to form attachments and kind of struggling with her attachments. She would rather kill her children than allow them to go through what she went through and go through what baby Suggs went through. Beloved died because of that. And because of that, she obviously cannot move on from the past. She is very much stuck in the past because she's representative of all of the trauma that Seth has been through in the past. All of the rape, the separation from her husband, and just her body being abused over and over and over again, and her freedom being stripped over and over and over again. Yeah, Beloved is very much representative of all those things because Seth's actions as a result of those traumas affected her life forever. And even though Beloved is sort of the monster of the story, this female character is definitely the monster of the story, her monster was affected by another monster, the moral monster of America, which is the white man. Let me not. Y'all get what I'm trying to say. I literally watched I'm Not Your Negro last night, so when I say moral monsters, literally I pulled that shit straight from Jones Baldwin. But yeah, slavery has made moral monsters of... It does not need to be said. And as a result, that moral monster has made a monster out of slaves themselves. Black people in America, they had to do monstrous things, and therefore Seth's monstrous yet almost necessary act, in her view, made a monster of her baby girl that she killed. Slavery undoubtedly would have done the same thing, which goes to show Toni Morrison never makes clear which thing was right. Should she have killed her baby, or should she have just let her possibly be taken by the slave master, who, by the way, didn't take any of her children again because the town managed to stop him. But by the time Seth realized that, it was too late. Yeah, Beloved very much represents the angry and insistent trauma, because Seth again is at this crossroads, and Beloved's corporeal return, which also kind of comes at the same time that Paula D returns, which is another figure from Seth's past, helps pull back these memories that Seth had to repress in order to move on with her life. And Beloved's insistently no, you cannot ignore this, you can't ignore me, you cannot forget my name. That's Beloved's entire rhetoric, and therefore she was selfish in her own kind of ways in trying to keep Seth in the past. So these are two daughters, the two children left of Seth, pulling her in these opposite directions, trying to figure out, what's up, what's gonna happen. And because Seth is being more pulled back into the past again throughout the entire story because of her relationship with Paula D, the reminder of her old husband, and then Beloved, who keeps on asking about these stories about her past and about all the terrible things that happened to her, Denver is inevitably drawn back to that trauma as well. This all kind of culminates in the end by the fact that Paul D, which was the love interest of Seth, he ends up leaving because he can't take living in the same house as this hellish, ghostly spirit that is Beloved. And there's this really powerful passage in each of the female characters' perspective that are still alive, Seth, Beloved, and Denver, they all get their own little passage. Basically at the very end of each of the passage, it says, "You are mine, Beloved is mine." And that means the trauma is all of theirs. And I think that really did a good job of representing the generational trauma. Something about that line, "You are mine," this trauma is mine. It doesn't matter if I didn't experience it the same way that other members of my family experienced it. It affected all of us, and therefore, Beloved, the embodiment of all of their trauma, is theirs. It's each of theirs. And so, at the very end, though, Denver decides to detach from the ghost because she's seeing the way it's causing her mother to waste away, because, again, the trauma, the only reason Seth was able to move forward is because she closed the trauma off of her mind. She could not think past this wall. She refused to go behind the wall. But she decided to, once she was confronted with this corporeal, literal, embodiment of her past, the spirit became so demanding, so pressing it, literally, she ignored all of her, present stuff. Basically, Beloved was causing her to wither away. Because with her presence and with her insistence and with the more demands to face her and to tell her stories about the past and to feed her and to give her everything that you are, she could not function in the present. She quit her job. She spent every single moment with Beloved, which is the embodiment of her trauma. And she became weaker. She became not even a mother anymore. She just became this feeble being. And it was basically the same pattern that we witnessed with baby Suggs, where it's once confronted with her trauma again, once there's this one corporeal event or person or moment that brings back everything that you were trying to forget, it causes you to wither away, you know? It causes you to almost like not even want to live anymore because you're so stuck in the past. So Denver eventually learns that. She sees her mother withering away and she's like, I don't want that to be us. I don't want that to be me. We can't survive with beloved being with us anymore. No matter how much you love her, no matter how much you don't want to forget, because there are some good things in the past, but that's only because like when you allow yourself to love, you inevitably get hurt as a slave, as a black person in America at that time, because, you know, we weren't fucking allowed to live. So Denver ends up going to the town to get help and then ends up doing this like prayer, and Beloved is banished forever. But even then, we still aren't sure, like, is Beloved truly the bad guy here? Because Beloved is, again, a product of this moral monster that is in America. She was a product of that, and again, she was this baby, this child. She doesn't really know any better. She just knows that she was forgotten, and she didn't want to be forgotten. But the thing is, if you remembered her, if Seth or Denver or Baby Suggs remembered her, they were drained. And that's exactly what happened to Baby Suggs, because remembering her and just knowing what happened to Beloved caused Baby Suggs to not want to live anymore. It made Seth almost not want to live anymore. And it made Denver say enough is enough. Denver, the embodiment of the present, of the future, of moving on and surviving, really. Attachments and just clinging to the present and not just detaching and staying with the past, like the thing that's really just draining you. Denver said enough is enough, and she ended up banishing the spirit.
I'm literally just realized this just now because I'm not sure if this is very cohesive in my argument, but yeah, like, love is freedom. Like, having attachments, that is a freedom that you couldn't afford as a slave, but you could afford when you're free of all that. And so therefore, when Denver ends up like being the person that takes them away from this trauma and ends up destroying the ghost in the past, it's because she is so willing and so capable of forming attachments. My mind just was blown right there, and I'm sure a lot of you figured it out, but shit. The fact that Toni Morrison is just this much of a genius. Anyway, back to the video.
So, yeah, basically the theme throughout the entire novel, which I did mention before, is that love is a freedom. And it was a freedom that almost every single woman in the story could not afford, because their children were either stripped away from them, their husbands, their brothers stripped away. Everything was taken away. They couldn't afford attachments. They couldn't afford to be human and to just give in to love, which is an instinct that we all have within us, but they couldn't afford to do it because of slavery and because of racism. Really, the entire freedom of the story was love, was forming attachments, was being present in the present, was being attached to the present, and the ability to move on. And it was a freedom that they were fighting for throughout the entirety of the story. Yeah, that was a lot, but basically throughout those 4 female figures in the story, we saw what generational trauma can do, and we saw exactly how it can like end your life. Yeah, the very ending, literally the very ending, which was a really powerful line. There are multiple paragraphs talking about what might have happened to Beloved and how like the town ends up forgetting her, and the line that's repeated a lot is that it was not a story to pass on. The story being Beloved, like what happened to her, what happened in slavery, it was not a story to pass on. Yeah, it was not a story to pass on. This is not a story to pass on. And then the very last line of the story is Beloved. Is it kind of tragic we have to forget in order to move on? Yeah. And Toni Morrison isn't even necessarily say that forgetting is the answer, but she isn't necessarily saying forgetting is a good thing, but it's a necessity, you know, in order to survive. But yeah, that was the entirety of the story. That was how trauma worked in the story. It worked throughout these 4 women, and including literally every other character in the novel, but I wanted to focus on them because their stories felt were like the center of the novel. So yeah, my throat is dry as fuck. Hopefully everything I said made sense. So yeah. I'm not exactly sure what book I'm going to be reading next. There are a lot of options I could talk about. But I think the next book I'm going to talk about for the Miseducation of Lauren Chi, this book club about Black stories, is going to be Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. And yes, is that a YA fantasy book? Absolutely. But there is a way we can analyze it that reveals a little bit more about history, the way revolutions work, and exactly what it means to be this Black protagonist. So I will put the theme for the thing down below or in the community discussion board thing. I'm pretty much done talking, not gonna lie. Thanks for watching. Hopefully that made some sort of sense. If you like this video, you should like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me on my social media accounts. They're both linked down below, and I will see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.